Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
US President Donald Trump is once again facing criticism, this time from key Republican supporters, after his latest comments about the violence in Charlottesville, Virginia over the weekend. It left one woman dead. In a bad-tempered press conference, he's returned to the sentiments that got him into trouble in the first place, saying that anti-racist protesters were violent too. Our North America editor John Sopel reports.
Amazing grace.
The memorial service for Heather Heyer, an anti-racism protester mown down by a white supremacist in Charlottesville on Saturday. But far from this being an occasion when a nation comes together, America seems more bitterly divided than ever.
They tried to kill my child to shut her up. Well, guess what? You just magnified her.
Jews will not replace us!
This was Charlottesville on Friday night. Racist groups chanting, "Jews will not replace us," carrying Ku Klux Klan-style torches, also marching to the slogan, "White Lives Matter." Yesterday, the president blamed both sides for the violence that ensued.
You had a group on one side and you had a group on the other, and they came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is.
It's true there was violence on both sides, but the race-hate protesters had come tooled up for trouble. Many carried guns. This isn't the army, but a right-wing militia that turned up, bristling with weaponry. Most had clubs, helmets and shields with white supremacist insignia. The anti-racism demonstrators weren't organised. They were mostly local people, among whom a small core had come to fight. But Donald Trump seeming to draw a moral equivalence between swastika-carrying neo-Nazis and anti-racism protesters has brought near universal condemnation. The senior Republican Paul Ryan tweeting, "We must be clear. White supremacy is repulsive. This bigotry is counter to all this country stands for. There can be no moral ambiguity." The only significant voice of support last night came from the former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, David Duke, who said, "Thank you, President Trump, for your honesty and courage to tell the truth about Charlottesville and condemn the leftist terrorists." There is reported to be deep unhappiness among some senior White House staff over the president's comments. He hadn't been due to say anything. And significantly, a new intervention, this time from the two former living Republican presidents, George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush, saying there is no room for bigotry or anti-Semitism in today's America. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Now, they tried to kill my child to shut her up. Well, guess what? He just magnified her. The mother of Heather Heyer, the woman killed during the Charlottesville protest against white supremacists, speaking at her memorial service today. By contrast, Donald Trump has faced near universal condemnation over his attempt to draw a moral equivalency between neo-Nazis and the counter-protesters who challenged them. The president is about to leave New York, where he's been staying for the past few days. From there, Kylie Morris reports.
No need for dog whistles. This was live, nationally telecast, direct from the president, who calls it like he sees it.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either.
There was venom and bitterness toward those who'd criticised his failure to disavow white supremacists directly after Charlottesville.
You will not replace us!
But it quickly became clear why he hadn't, because among these torch-bearing white folk, well, according to President Trump, there are fine people.
White lives matter! White lives matter!
And you had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
That other name, Emancipation Park. Near that place where others saw clashes between provocateurs advocating a hateful ideology and people who would deny them, President Trump saw provocateurs with a permit and their violent disruptors.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
As
far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute, I'm not finished. I'm not finished, fake news. You had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now.
Just outside on Fifth Avenue, the president's words thudded onto the sidewalk with explosive effect. We filmed these two men headed to their respective protest pens. President Trump's advocate had no words for us. He doesn't trust the media. But Norman Thomas stopped a while. What is it that you wanted to say to that young man?
Make America great is a code word for make America white again. And people like me who's been here 8 generations don't have no place in this country anymore. And that's sad. And nobody seems to do anything about it. People are accepting it. And whatever crazy Donald Trump does, they make it normal. It's not normal.
So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture.
The press conference descended into bad-tempered histrionics. The president's new chief of staff, General John Kelly, looking ever more intently at the floor as it proceeded. As he left, the president squeezed in a quick plug for his winery near Charlottesville.
I own actually one of the largest wineries in the United States. It's in Charlottesville.
Seasoned observers were left lifting their jaws from the floor.
I think what you saw today was that Donald Trump doesn't want to be managed. He doesn't want to be improved. He wants to be himself and unleash his inner sort of demons on the world, and he did it today. So it was shocking to watch. I've never, I've been following politics since I was 12 years old. I have never seen a public figure, let alone a president, melt down, utterly melt down the way Donald Trump did today.
As headlines denounced the president for giving comfort to racists, former KKK Grand Wizard David Duke, prominent in Charlottesville, thanked Donald Trump for his honesty and courage. In Charlottesville today, they're paying tribute to the honesty and courage of Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old protester mown down by a car allegedly driven by a white supremacist. Her father spoke movingly of the America she was fighting for.
She wanted to put down hate. And for my part, we just need to stop all this stuff and just forgive each other.
They tried to kill my child to shut her up. Well, guess what? You just magnified her.
Love, not hate. She was remembered too on Fifth Avenue by her words and image. People there beat the drum for an America whose long arc of history bends toward justice.
Love, not hate. What makes America great?
But one elderly man told me his fear now was not that Donald Trump was elected despite his bigotry, rather because of it.
This may be a shocking moment in American politics, but it is no surprise. Donald Trump, on the campaign trail with his rhetoric, boosted the neo-Nazis, boosted the alt-right, and he's now revealed he is the same person now as he was then. What matters is how people respond to this. Now, senior Republicans may be pushing back, but what are they going to do? Interestingly, the president, who's just driven by here, says that he is disbanding 2 of his economic advisory councils. Let's face it, CEOs were already starting to resign in protest. He says he wanted to save them that pressure. But what about the pressure in small-town America, where they're planning to take down a statue, a Confederate statue, and the neo-Nazis are coming to town? This is going to keep happening. Donald Trump has opened this wound, and there is no quick remedy.
Thanks, Kylie. Well, joining me now from Southampton in New York is Michael Eric Dyson. He's a professor of sociology at Georgetown University and author of Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America. And from Nashville in Tennessee, we're joined by the conservative commentator and journalist, Scottie Nell Hughes. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Scottie Nell Hughes. As you heard Kylie Morris, our reporter there, say, Donald Trump has opened a wound that he will not close himself by being continuously ambiguous about this issue. What's your reaction to that?
Well, with all due respect, I completely disagree. Unfortunately, hatred and racism has a long track record within U.S. history, and the events of Saturday were horrendous. Another mark and a reminder that hatred does exist. What President Trump has done is he's condemned it, not once, not twice, but obviously because he is a president, not necessarily a politician. He continued that emotion yesterday in his remarks when he even went even further and continued to condemn the hatred that was allowed on both sides. And once again, I think that we need to talk about, I agree, this is another wound that will continue to be open every time there is a statue that is taken down, which I'm one of those, if you're going to take down the statues of the Confederacy, and I do live in the South, then let's make sure that we take down all of the statues of KKK supporters, including former Senator Robert Byrd, who just happens to be on hundreds of buildings but was a Democrat, and others. Let's also continue to go down the list. Let's also look at FDR, who imprisoned Japanese Americans during World War II.
Sadly,
let's eradicate all hate.
Okay, we can't go through the whole list because that would occupy the entire evening. Michael Eric Dyson, you heard the response there from Nashville, Tennessee. What do you say?
Well, with all due respect to my valued colleague, Ms. Scottie, what the president did yesterday is reprehensible. What he did was reinforce the stakes of white supremacy. Scottie is absolutely right. There is a long history in this country of horrible beliefs about black people, about Jews, about women, about people of alternate sexual orientation and the like. The reality is that the neo-Nazis who were on display were not a mixture of good and bad people. The reality is that the bigoted right wing, the alternative right in this country, the white nationalists have no interest except to subvert democracy. To celebrate Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson is to celebrate people who literally hated the nation so much they wanted to leave it. They wanted to secede from this nation. So no amount of historical revisionism can undermine the fact that what President Trump did yesterday was to give a strengthened hand to bigots in this country, to amplify from his bully pulpit their heinous beliefs, and to, in one sense, challenge the very principles of democracy that have seen this country forward since its inception. So I agree with Sister Scottie that we should attack all emblems of racism across the board, but the reality is this particular march mandated that this particular president speak out about this, and he failed the test ignobly.
Okay, Scottie Nell Hughes, I mean, a protester was killed on the other side. An innocent 32-year-old protester was killed. So when it comes to equivocation, we're not dealing with a level playing field here, are we?
Well, that's absolutely horrible, but I would like to think that we need to hold the mayor of that town, Charlottesville, actually hold him accountable, as the former chief of police has been questioning why was a road that is normally closed to traffic on the weekends, why was it open to traffic during this when we knew that there was going to be hostile interactions? And what President Trump did accurately call out is that there were Antifa, there were members of the alt-left, very hateful members, and even you have the ACLU in Virginia pointing out, tweeting out that there were clubbing happening from both sides. They don't know which side hit first. So there was badness, there was hate on both sides being displayed on Saturday, and I think that we should hold the mayor and the city council there in Charlottesville very accountable for why they were irresponsible and did not call in the Virginia State Guard Friday night when they saw hundreds of men out there with torches marching, saying hateful things. Why would you not want to have law and order in your town, knowing that chaos more than likely was going to erupt on Saturday when the two different groups of hate decided to meet?
Michael Eric Dyson, the president has been widely criticized for his language. He would say that he's trying to unite this very divided country, even if he's not doing a very good job of it at the moment. What can he say? What words coming out of his mouth would reassure your community that he is your president as well?
I resign. Short of that, what this president has done is given an emboldened stance in public portfolio to groups who should be now racial has-beens. David Duke should be on the periphery of American society, and yet he has been reignited in his attempt to torch through the American imagination in ways that are reprehensible. And who would have thought that the man at the top of the food chain, the man occupying the highest office in the land, ostensibly the most powerful person in the world, would embolden a white supremacist and a white nationalist like David Duke. So the reality is there is no equivocation here. There is no denying that there could have been eruptions of violence on both sides, but only one side killed another side. We should hold the President of the United States accountable for what he said and did.
I'm afraid we've got to leave it there. I'm sorry, Scotty Noel Hughes. You've both had your chance. This conversation could go on for days, sadly. I think you're as divided as we were 5 minutes ago. Michael Eric Dyson, Scotty Noel Hughes, thank you so much for coming on the programme.
It's perhaps not surprising that President Trump has faced a fierce barrage of criticism for his latest comments on the racial violence in Charlottesville from Democrats. But today he faced a stinging rebuke from two former presidents from his own Republican Party, President George W. Bush and his father, President George Bush Sr. In a joint statement, they quoted one of Charlottesville's most famous sons, another president, Thomas Jefferson, who helped write the Declaration of Independence. The two Bushes had Mr. Trump in their sights when they said Americans must always reject racial bigotry, anti-Semitism and hatred in all its forms, all which were on show in Virginia on Saturday night.
The presidential convoy heads out of New York. Donald Trump will find it far more difficult to leave behind this race row.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
An angry group calling itself Unite the Right spat out their anti-Semitic and racist chants.
White lives matter! White lives matter!
According to the president, there were many fine people at this rally last Friday.
You also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did.
380 ACP, Glock 19, 9mm.
After the rally, one of the extremists showed off his arsenal of weapons and claimed victory.
We knew that we were going to meet a lot of resistance. The fact that nobody on our side died, I'd go ahead and call that points for us. The fact that none of our people killed anybody unjustly, I think, is a plus for us.
No recognition of Heather Heyer, the young woman killed by a car allegedly driven by one of the extremists, and remembered by family and friends today.
They tried to kill my child to shut her up. Well, guess what? You just magnified her.
Two former presidents, George Bush Sr. and Jr., released this statement. America must always reject racial bigotry, anti-Semitism and hatred in all forms. We know these truths to be everlasting because we've seen the decency and greatness of our country. But in Baltimore, the statues of two leaders of the Confederacy were removed under the cover of darkness in a bid to stop further confrontation.
The president has to totally condemn this. And this is not about winning an argument. This is about the fact that now these folks apparently are going to go other places and they think that they had some sort of a victory.
Despite all this, Vice President Pence on a trip to South America remaining loyal.
And I stand with the president, and I stand by those words.
He's been labelled the bigot-in-chief, but the president shows no remorse and no inclination to retreat.
Does anyone know I own a house in Charlottesville? Where is it? Oh, boy.
Juliet Bremner, News at 10, Washington.
Prime Minister Theresa May was the first Western leader to meet President Trump shortly after his inauguration, famously holding hands with him at the White House. She also raised eyebrows during her visit for inviting Mr. Trump to the UK for a state visit. Well, today, Theresa May reacted unequivocally to President Trump's comments last night, but Downing Street says that the state visit is still on.
Hand in hand back in January, but today the gloves were off when Theresa May criticised Donald Trump's failure to explicitly condemn far-right violence.
I see no equivalence between those who propound fascist views and those who oppose them. And I think it is important for all those in positions of responsibility to condemn far-right views wherever we hear them.
So where does this leave the state visit, initially understood to be planned for October this year?
The President Trump and the First Lady would pay a state visit to the United Kingdom later this year, and I'm delighted.
But the president then said he wouldn't come to the UK unless the public would welcome him. When the proposed state visit by Donald Trump was not mentioned in the Queen's speech in June, many saw that as a signal that a visit by such a controversial politician was being postponed. But today, Downing Street officials said they were still looking for a date, and the president is still expected to be a guest here at the palace at some point in the future.
I don't think a state visit from Donald Trump would be appropriate at this time. He has made statements concerning what's happened in Charlottesville, which I think are awful.
It's rare for a US president to attract cross-party condemnation. It makes it even more difficult to imagine a time he'll ever be warmly welcome here. Angus Walker, News at 10.
And Juliet Bremner joins me from Washington. Now, Juliet, do you think that there is any chance that Theresa May's comments will make any kind of impact in Washington, given what's going on over there?
Well, we know that President Trump is notoriously thin-skinned. He doesn't like criticism, and I'm sure he won't really like it from somebody he regards as an ally. But let's put this in some kind of perspective. There has been a tremendous domestic backlash, and I think that Theresa May's words will probably just get drowned out in what is a cacophony of criticism that he's facing here in the United States. Let me just list some of the people who have come out publicly against him. He's had to disband 2 of his business forums with CEOs and business leaders that he had put a lot of store by previously, because so many people have resigned in the last 2 days, saying that they can no longer work with a president who has these kind of views. And then today we had the military top brass, it seemed like all of them, tweeting their reassurance out to those in the military. It was the Marine Corps, the Air Force, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all saying we reject racism in the military forces here in America. And then we have to think about what might happen this weekend. There are still a lot of rumours that there will be white supremacists, the far-right extremists, who've taken some kind of sucker from these messages from the president, who are planning to have marches in various cities across this country. Well, if that goes ahead, you can be absolutely sure that Donald Trump will be blamed for it.
OK, Julia, in Washington, thanks very much indeed.
Is Donald Trump a racist, or just another politician protecting his supporter base? That's what's being asked across America and around the world right now. Only 24 hours after the US president explicitly condemned white supremacists and neo-Nazis over their violent protests in Charlottesville, Virginia, having been condemned for not doing so earlier, Donald Trump has backpedaled, saying there was blame on both sides and not all marchers were white supremacists. Theresa May made her position clear today, saying it was important to condemn far-right views wherever we hear them. So what was Donald Trump trying to say? And why did he change his message? I asked Sam Nunberg, former political advisor to President Trump.
I think that it was unnecessary for President Trump yesterday during his press conference to leave it up to reinterpretation about his initial 2 statements. If you go over the choreography of the first 2 statements, his initial statement says there's violence on both sides. I condemn it. I condemn the entire incident here, and it's inexcusable.
Sam, surely it's a very easy thing for a president to stand there, just like people on the Republican side have done. The Bushes have come out now and said we need to unilaterally just condemn and reject bigotry and violence, and just say that in reference to the KKK members and the white supremacists. David Duke was there. People know who was there.
Which he did.
But what I'm saying to you is...
And the president did in his second statement. The president did in his second statement.
He seems to have undone some of that work with his comments, his latest comments. And what I'm trying to understand from you as someone who's worked for him is, does he actually hold prejudiced views, or is he just trying to protect his supporter base?
Okay, so first of all, he does not hold any prejudiced views at all. We can go into it how I can show you from my own personal experience. But I also just want to take the premise of your question, hold on to his base. His base is not neo-Nazis. His base is not the KKK. His base are Republicans and blue-collar white, predominantly Democrats, and self-described independents, and they came out and they voted for him.
If you say Trump holds no racist or prejudiced views, is one of the reasons that he's kind of fudging it a bit because he doesn't want to offend that part of his base?
No. What it is, and this is where I find it offensive, is that people like me, and this is falling out of my ear, we feel that the entire base, that this movement and this organic movement that came out that we had not seen since the 80s, that got him into office, where he won states such as Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Republicans had not won in over 35 years, we feel that it's completely delegitimized by parts of the media when they have incidents like this, that you then want to say, well, they're just a bunch of KKK, they're just a bunch of white nationalists, and they're just a bunch of racists. They're not.
Has Donald Trump done himself a disservice then by muddying the waters and getting defensive?
Oh yeah, he certainly did. He certainly did. He certainly left it up to an interpretation that his opponents or others or many neutral observers, frankly, can run with. And he left it up to an interpretation that his political enemies can use against him. But by no means is he a racist, or no means is he an anti-Semite. I spent thousands of hours with him. Now let's go over me. I worked for him from 2011 to mid-2015. I worked for him when people in my industry would laugh at me when I said this guy can be elected president. I worked hundreds of hours a week for him. Nobody would take my phone calls. We were laughed at. He was called a birther. He was called a joke. People in the elite said he had no chance. And subsequently, people leaked out an 8-year-old Facebook post I had up. I don't even remember putting it up. Nevertheless, I took responsibility for it, and I was forgiven by Reverend Al Sharpton, but it was racially charged.
Yes, Sam, if I may, just to remind people, you put up this post and you did use the N-word, and that was what you're talking about.
I didn't use the N-word.
What did you use?
I didn't use the N. It was a reference. I didn't spell out the N-word. But in any event, I was fired.
For a racist post.
For a racially charged Facebook post, even after forgiven by Reverend Sharpton. So if anything, it shows that Trump is not a racist, doesn't want to be associated with them. And that was after being with me for 5.5 years and knowing that I don't have a racist bone in my body either.
I mentioned the Bushes have come out and said there should be no equivocation about the condemnation of racism, bigotry, obviously fellow Republicans there. And we've also heard only a few hours ago that Donald Trump has closed down the Manufacturing Council as well, with regards to, the people around him and the people who are having to sit around him, because some of them were also very aggrieved by his comments or lack of comments about Charlottesville. Is he going to be feeling isolated now?
He'll once again get through this. He's going to. I'm sure he'll do an interview or he'll speak to the American people, and he'll start going back on the agenda. At the end of the day, Donald Trump will live or die by his performance in office. If the economy is doing well, the world seems secure, he will get reelected. If it is not, and he cannot get an agenda through, he cannot pass tax reform, he can't fix health care, he will have trouble getting reelected. American people care about results.
Sam, thank you very much for talking to us today.
Now, in the heat of the row about President Trump's response to last weekend's violence in Virginia, we might have forgotten that it all started with an argument over a statue. Far-right nationalists are against proposals to remove symbols celebrating those who fought to defend slavery in the American Civil War. Now, in more comments that might prove controversial, President Trump says removing the statues is tantamount to ripping apart America's history and culture. Here's our North America correspondent, Nick Bryant.
Wall Street, not just the spiritual home of US commerce, but where America inaugurated its first president, George Washington. He's regarded as a national hero, the general who defeated the British. But he was also a slave owner. And Donald Trump suggested today that these kind of statues could be in jeopardy if monuments celebrating the Confederacy, which fought during the Civil War to uphold slavery, are brought down. Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart, he wrote on Twitter, with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. You can't change history, but you can learn from it. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. Who's next? Washington, Jefferson. So foolish.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not
debate has been reignited by these torch-carrying, hate-spewing neo-Nazis. They gathered around a statue of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville last week to protest the city's decision to remove it. Donald Trump was slow to single them out for criticism and then said there were some very fine people on both sides during last weekend's disturbances. Anti-racist protesters in North Carolina this week hauled down a monument to Confederate soldiers. Other cities like Baltimore have decided to remove statues in a more orderly manner. There are more than 700 Confederate monuments, symbols of hate to many African Americans, symbols of heritage to many whites. But does it distort that debate to liken Confederate generals such as Robert E. Lee with more unifying figures like George Washington?
People who have tried, including the president, people who have tried to suggest an equation between Thomas Jefferson and George Washington on the one hand and Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson on the other, are people who are either ignorant of history or willing to distort it in an incredibly cynical way.
In Charlottesville last night, the light at this vigil came from candles, not torches. There's still anger here that Donald Trump says both sides were to blame for the weekend's violence. This has been a moment of soul-searching in America, but that process hasn't been led by the president, as would ordinarily be the case. Quite the opposite. Donald Trump is a prime cause of this national reckoning. It's his presidential stature that's also in question. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Now, Donald Trump has waded back into the debate about America's Confederate past yet again with a series of tweets declaring that the history and culture of our great country is being ripped apart. Despite widespread outrage at the president's stance, a new poll suggests although most Americans believe he bungled his response to the Charlottesville violence, they agree with him that Confederate monuments should stay. Well, let's go live to our Washington correspondent, Kylie Morris. Kylie.
Jackie, this feels like a tactical move, I have to say, by the president, suddenly diving into the culture wars, accusing those who want to remove these statues of hijacking history and American culture. Clearly, I think President Trump is trying to make this fight deliberately about statues and not white supremacists. It's a very useful way to deflect criticism over his response to Charlottesville. Now, there in that town in Virginia, friends and strangers walked in procession last night, remembering Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old paralegal who was killed when a car was driven at speed toward a group of counter-protesters on Saturday, police say by a 20-year-old white supremacist who's now been charged with her murder. Now, the removal of Confederate statues really for many American towns is an issue that came to life again in 2015, which was just after the mass killing of 9 people, all African American, by another white supremacist in a church in Charleston in South Carolina. Now, afterwards, Nikki Haley, who was then the governor of South Carolina, now she's in President Trump's cabinet, she's the US ambassador to the UN, she ordered the taking down of the Confederate flag that flew outside the State House. Now we have another alleged act of racial violence, and the president is taking the opposite view. Now, in Durham, North Carolina, on Monday night, activists took down a statue dedicated to Confederate soldiers in the town, taking matters into their own hands. In the past few hours, close to 100 people have turned out to symbolically turn themselves in to police in support of 3 others who were arrested over that event. But I think, look, the bigger politics here is neatly summed up by the president's chief strategist himself, Steve Bannon, who said, look, the left wants to say it's all racist, just give me more, tear down more statues. Clearly, this White House has made the calculation that this is an issue that can only benefit them, strengthen the hand of an embattled president, even if the cost of it is that it divides the rest of the country.
Kylie, thanks very much.
So, Julius, let's get back to your op-ed. You're right. Mr. Trump once boasted that he could shoot someone in the street and not lose voters. Well, someone was just killed in the street by a white supremacist in Charlottesville. His refusal this weekend to specifically and immediately denounce the groups responsible for this intolerable violence was both morally disgusting and monumentally stupid. In this, Mr. Trump failed perhaps the easiest imaginable test of presidential leadership. You believe he failed an easy test there. What does that say about the president? Do you believe the president is racist?
Well, he certainly says a lot of racist things. I've never spoken to him. I couldn't deny it. Let me put it that way.
Why not?
Just based on his actions this past weekend, and of course all the other incidents that you add up that don't no longer look like misstatements or blunders, but his actual views.
Do you think, when we talked about people working in the White House and you said someone has to run the government, do you think people working for President Trump, either in the White House or as cabinet members, resign?
Like I said, I mean that there's a moral case to be made for that, but at the same time, some decent people have to run the country. And, you know, actually he did bring in, you know, people like Wilbur Ross, Gary Cohn, Rex Tillerson, Mattis. Agree with them on policy or not, these are very accomplished people, and they're serious people. And, you know, the world isn't going to stop, and someone needs to address the issues that we face. And so I hope that, you know, intelligent, responsible people, in a sense, have a duty to stay on whatever moral issues that might compel them to leave are.
There's talk and there's action. So far, we're hearing a lot of talk. What should Republican lawmakers do, Julius, in your estimation?
I don't know what they can do necessarily, other than, you know, denounce the president for his, you know, inexplicable conduct. I mean, I think if the president had any sense, he would probably resign. I don't see how he can govern. But if he had any sense, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
You have defended the president again and again. If he is watching right now, what do you tell him? What would you say to him?
I think he's let down tremendously. The vast majority of his supporters who want nothing to do with the alt-right and these neo-Nazi movements, I think that he has, you know, harmed the country tremendously, and for the good of the country, you know, whether it's something as drastic as even resignation, or, you know, a major course correction of some kind is necessary to repair the social fabric that he's damaged and the other policy failures that he's presided over.
Julius Krein wrote a very interesting, very moving and powerful op-ed in the New York Times. Julius, thank you so much. Please come back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Back with the panel. Jeffrey Toobin, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm a little surprised. You know, the idea that Donald Trump has surprised anyone is peculiar to me. I mean, look at his record. I mean, look at the fact that he made his name as a politician with being a birther, a racist crusade based entirely on lies. Now people are surprised that he's engaged in, you know, the most appalling kind of discussion of racial issues. I mean, I guess I'm puzzled by that anyone is surprised that we have reached this point.
Yeah. Jack?
Well, first of all, I think Jeffrey has a point. I don't know why I think they're feigning some indignation right here. And I agree with Jeffrey on that, but I do want to point out the birther stuff was started by Hillary Clinton.
That's not true. That's another talking point that you need to get right before you. It's not right. Jack, stop. Jack, I'm not going to let you repeat that because that is a lie. It has been fact-checked, and it has been denounced, and it has been refuted a million times. It's not so. Simone, go ahead.
No, it wasn't.
Unless you're going to tell the truth. You're not going to tell the truth, Jack. Go ahead.
No, Don.
Jack, it's not true.
I was on a very friendly
one more time. It's not true. It's not true.
It is true.
It is not true. Please stop right there.
Don.
Jack, stop.
Don,
Jack, it's not true.
Simone,
go ahead.
With this.
We're not having a disagreement on something that's not true. It is not true that the president was born in Africa. It is true that he was born here. It is not true that Hillary Clinton started the birther thing. And Donald Trump spread it for years. He was a head birther in chief.
2007.
Go ahead, Simone, please. Simone, go ahead.
Admitted it to Chris
Jack, please let her speak. Go ahead, Simone.
But I guess the thing that struck me with the interview that you just had, when I thought it was fascinating, but I've had the opportunity to sit through a lot of different focus groups and interactions with Obama-Trump voters. So this was really interesting to me. The thing that struck me was when you asked the gentleman if he thought Donald Trump was a racist, and he said, you know, I've never spoken to him, I don't know him, but Yeah, basically. And for a long time, I actually never thought Donald Trump was racist. I was on Anderson's show just the other night, and Pierce Denard asked me, did I think the president was a racist? And I said, look, I think he's a white supremacist sympathizer. But today when the president was tweeting again about culture and tripling down on these state issues, something just clicked in my brain, and it made me think that not only is Donald Trump a white supremacist sympathizer, I think he identifies with this notion of white supremacy, this notion of preservation of white culture. And does that make him a white supremacist? Yeah. Does that essentially make him a racist? I absolutely believe so. And I've been hesitant to say that because I think words matter, words are really important, and I don't like to throw the word racist around. I don't like to throw lots of different kind of words like that around. And so today, I'm at the point, much like the guest you just had, that the President of the United States is a racist. And we have put a white supremacist in the White House.
Chris Cillizza?
I mean, look, I think it's beyond debate that Trump's coded language, his unwillingness to condemn things that clearly moral society condemns, that this is a feature, not a glitch. I mean, as Jeff points out, that his candidacy was born in conspiracy theory. He has dabbled in conspiracy theories of, different things. That he saw Muslims celebrating on New Jersey rooftops. Barack Obama wiretapped his phones. Ted Cruz's father might have been involved in the JFK assassination. Right. So not all of them have the racial component, but this is clearly something that he dabbles in. I don't know what conclusion you can draw other than, and Jack made this point earlier, that okay, we need to, in our own communities, set the example. I think that's of real value, but at the same time, it is impossible to dismiss when the President of the United States abdicates moral leadership. And no matter what you think of Donald Trump, I find it hard to believe you would not see what has happened over the last 5 days since an abdication of moral leadership. When it happens, it does have a trickle-down effect that can counteract a lot of the good that we're trying to do on the person-to-person level. That's why who the president is and how the president acts, not just in politics, but acts. He's the president of our country, matters a lot. The words he says, and frankly, the words he doesn't say, matter. It's hard for me. I used to always say, well, Donald Trump just doesn't get that. It's hard to say he doesn't get that anymore. Yeah. He chooses not to do that.
Care.
I don't know why, but he doesn't.
He doesn't. Okay, so listen, Jack, we love having you, but I can't let you come here unless you tell the truth. I don't. And if you repeat a lie, Jack, hang on. Let me get my thought out. If you repeat a lie enough, people start to believe it, and I don't want lies repeated and people believing untruths on this show.
This afternoon, President Trump tweeted his condolences to the people of Spain. Quote, "The United States condemns the terror attack in Barcelona, Spain, and will do whatever is necessary to help. Be tough and strong. We love you." And then the president tweeted this: "Study what General Pershing of the United States did to terrorists when caught. There was no more radical Islamic terror for 35 years. Let's take a look to this story that he has told about General Pershing and how he handled terrorists. The president has discussed this claim in much more detail before. Take a look.
He caught 50 terrorists who did tremendous damage and killed many people. And he took the 50 terrorists, and he took 50 men, and he dipped 50 bullets in pig's blood. And he had his men load his rifles, and he lined up the 50 people, and they shot 49 of those people. And the 50th person, he said, you go back to your people, and you tell them what happened. And for 25 years, there wasn't a problem."
So, that story is not true. There is no evidence backing up President Trump's claim that in the early 1900s, General John Pershing tried to quell a Muslim uprising in the Philippines by dipping 50 bullets in pig's blood, which is, of course, offensive to Muslims, and shooting 49 Muslim insurgents and telling the fifth to go tell everyone what he saw. Historians say there's zero evidence to that. None. Not true. There is evidence that a different military leader in the Philippines may have buried dead insurgents with a dead pig, but none that Pershing did it or even approved of it. And most important, there's no evidence that burying dead insurgents with a pig did anything to stop the violence. So just to be clear, what happened today, in the face of a horrific terrorist attack, where people are still finding out that loved ones have been killed or injured, President Trump just told the world to study a story that is not true, a lie about an American general dipping bullets in pigs' blood and killing insurgents. A story that, by the way, does nothing to help keep our soldiers and the American people traveling the world safer. At times of crisis, the nation turns to its president for reassurance and for truth and for moral clarity, and the lie about General Pershing does not provide any of those. Also, one might observe the very different reactions from this president. Today's Islamic terrorist attack, which the president condemned immediately and with this inflammatory, untrue story, and how President Trump responded to the white supremacist terrorist attack on Saturday, which is an attack he has yet to unequivocally call terrorism at all. Now, there are signs that President Trump's rhetoric this past week is causing major distress among members of his own party on Capitol Hill in a way we have not seen before. Some are finally going public with their dismay. Today, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott said that the president's moral authority is compromised.
I'm not going to defend the indefensible. I'm not here to do that. I'm here to be clear and to be concise and succinct. His comments on Monday were strong. His comments on Tuesday started erasing the comments that were strong. What we want to see from our president is clarity and moral authority, and that moral authority is compromised when Tuesday happens. There's no question about that. We should all call that on the carpet. I certainly have.
Another Republican senator and a key early supporter of President Trump, Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, is now publicly questioning his competence. Let's bring in CNN's Jim Acosta, who's in Bridgewater, New Jersey, near where the president's working on his working vacation. And Jim, Senator Corker delivered what can only be called a stinging rebuke to President Trump earlier today.
That's right, Jake. These are some of the strongest words yet coming from a fellow Republican. And it's remarkable because Bob Corker is not one of the president's usual critics. Listen to what he had to say.
The president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability nor some of the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful. He also recently has not demonstrated that he understands the character of this nation.
Now, President Trump is still trying to convince Americans that he was right when he blamed both sides for the violence in Charlottesville, and he's slamming any critics, even those in his own party, who get in his way.
For the second straight day, President Trump shied away from the cameras following his divisive comments on the violence in Charlottesville. But on Twitter, the president is still in cleanup mode, blasting Republicans who criticized him and falsely claiming he did not put white supremacists on the same level as the people protesting them. Tweeting, publicity-seeking Lindsey Graham falsely stated that I said there is moral equivalency between the KKK, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists. He also attacked Arizona Senator Jeff Flake, cheering on his upcoming primary opponent, tweeting, great to see that Dr. Kelly Ward is running against Jeff Flake, who was weak on borders, crime, and a non-factor in Senate. He's toxic. Graham hit back in a statement. Because of the manner in which you have handled the Charlottesville tragedy, you are now receiving praise from some of the most racist and hate-filled individuals and groups in our country. For the sake of our nation, as our president, please fix this. GOP Senator Bob Corker lashed out at the president to reporters in Tennessee, saying,
the president has not yet been able to demonstrate the stability nor some of the competence that he needs to demonstrate in order to be successful.
The president is also showing more sympathy for the Confederate statues coming down around the country, doubling down on his comments earlier this week. George Washington and Robert E. Lee are not the same, Mr. President.
George Washington was a slave owner.
But sir...
Was George Washington a slave owner?
Yes, he was in the 1700s.
Will George Washington now lose his status? You're changing history. You're changing culture.
The president tweeted, sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. You can't change history, but you can learn from it. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson. Who's next? Washington, Jefferson? So foolish. Democrats aren't buying it. President Trump has made a living off of changing the subject. You know, he wants this now to be about statues and monuments, Kate. And the last time I checked, the Republican Party was frankly in favor of local control.
Joining the debate, the president's chief strategist, Steve Bannon, slammed white supremacists to the progressive American prospect, saying, ethno-nationalism, it's losers, it's a fringe element. I think the media plays it up too much, and we got to help crush it, you know, help crush it more. At first, Bannon claimed he didn't know he was being interviewed.
He called me, and weirdly, he never said that we were off the record.
But sources close to Bannon say he really intended the remarks to divert attention from the president's comments on Charlottesville. One source told CNN Bannon knew full well this would distract from criticism. Now, the White House declined to comment on Bannon's remarks, but a White House spokesperson did weigh in on the future of the president's top economic advisor, Gary Cohn, who was with Mr. Trump at that wild news conference on Tuesday. Sources said Cohn was upset by the president's comments, but the White House said Cohn is not going anywhere. Jake?
Jim Acosta, thank you so much.